And now for something completely different. Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. So previously to now I've talked a lot about jewellery and gemstones and making techniques and craft and the such, and we discussed initially when I first launched the channel way back towards the end of 2019 about bringing you some vegan recipes. So today is going to be the first of those vegan recipes, and it's one that I have trialled at a local vegan diner in Banbury where I do some work every now and again, and I've had some really good feedback on it, so I thought I would share that recipe with you. So this is my Zesty Citrus Cheesecake. Now it is completely vegan. It's not exactly what you'd call diabetic friendly, but I will give you an approximate nutritional breakdown, so obviously you can work that out for yourself if it's going to be suitable. So I've got a little list of ingredients to begin with, which I'm going to read out to you, but I will put them in the description for the video below. So you're going to need a lemon, a lime and an orange, and we'll talk about what you need from those a bit later. You're going to need two 200-gram packs of cream cheese, a vegan alternative. I'm using Violife, and when I go through the recipe instructions I'll explain why. You'll also need 100 grams of icing or powdered sugar, 300 grams of biscuits. Now you can purchase oaty style biscuits in many of the major and budget supermarkets. They're really quite inexpensive, and you will obviously need to check the ingredients panel, but most of them are accidentally vegan. They're not low sugar, but they are vegan, so that's always good. You'll also need just up to 100 grams of a hard fat. Now again, you will be able to choose your own. There's a lovely Danish company that make a block butter, which is completely vegan. You can also use a Stork or a Trex or something like that, but whichever sits most with your ethical standards. Optional toppings, I managed to find at Christmas time some edible glitter dust, which is basically a very, very fine icing sugar with edible particulate in it, which is very spangly and sparkly. It's really pretty. And I've also got some freeze-dried strawberries. Now these are just some suggested toppings. You could use whatever you fancied to enhance the top of your cheesecake. If you make this cheesecake and you divide it into 12 portions, you're looking at just over 300 calories a slice, 21 grams of fat and 27 grams of carbohydrate. So if you are diabetic or you're watching your carbs, then that's some information that will be slightly useful to you. Otherwise, just don't even worry too much about it. Try not to eat it all in one go. It is absolutely delicious. So, because this is a new project for me, I've recorded it in a slightly different way. What I'm going to do now is just talk you through each of the different sections, each of the different steps that we're going to use to achieve the recipe. And then my husband or my technical team are going to edit in the overhead camera shots. If you are brand new to cooking, then they might be helpful. Obviously, if you have been in the kitchen before, you might not need them, but I'm going to pop them in anyway. So the first thing that we're going to do is to obtain the zest from our 3 citrus fruits. We've got a lemon, a lime and an orange. Now I have got a little zester which I have used for several years, but if you don't have access to a zester, then you can also use a traditional potato or root vegetable carrot peeler, and then you can finely slice the resultant peel. They do need to be quite sharp if you're using a potato peeler, because you're just looking to get just the zest. So before you get too much of the white, the pith that is underneath the coloured surface of your citrus fruits, we're just looking for the coloured film on top. I have chosen to use unwaxed fruits. This is because a lot of waxing out there to keep your fruit looking fresher and staying fresher longer is a beeswax. Some companies use an alternative wax, but obviously if you are trying to follow a vegan ethos, then avoiding waxed fruits altogether will negate you having to find out what type of wax has been used. So first thing that you will do is obtain the zest from your citrus, and this is how you do that. So I'm just going to use the zester to draw over the surface, and what I'm looking to do ideally here is get nice long strands of zest, and what you can achieve by moving the zester just slightly to one side is nice long strands but also zero waste. You're looking to go back over the same section and get as much of that pith as possible. If you're going to be using the alternative method, which is your potato or vegetable peeler, then you can get quite large swathes in one go, and then you will use a sharp blade later to just slice those up. So we're going to keep just a little bit of each of those different coloured zests or rinds if you prefer. We're going to pop them in a pot to one side. We're not going to chop them because they make a really attractive topping for your finished cheesecake. Now I managed to dust mine in a tiny little pot with some of the glitter sugar I was talking about earlier, and that not only preserves them from browning, but it also looks really super. It looks sparkly and fantastic, and if you are catering a posh event, or you're trying to impress your family and friends with something that is completely dairy free, then it does make it worth the effort tracking some down. Obviously you'll need to check the ingredients at your local stockist. The next thing that we're going to do is to retrieve all of the zest from all of our citrus fruits, and make sure that you've got all of that where as possible, as much as you can, because it really enhances the flavour to use fresh zest and to use quite a lot of it. So I would put that all into a big pile. We've already reserved some of each colour, some of the lemon, some of the lime and some of the orange, and the remaining we're going to put onto a board, and we're going to use a chopping fashion to just make that nice and finely sliced, finely chopped, one way and then the other, and that means that all of that lovely flavour oil is ready to escape into the next section. When we get to it, I will show you obviously how this all comes together. So once you have reserved your long threads of zest in the glitter sugar, if you're using it to one side, you've chopped the remainder of your zest and you've put that to another side. And because we won't be using it immediately, I would recommend putting those both into a sealed tub to stop them from browning or oxidizing in any way. It just keeps them fresher, obviously, if you're sealing them away from oxygen and from nasty bacteria. Next thing we're going to do is to juice all of those fruits. Now, first of all, I've used a medium-sized orange, and there's more than plenty juice in there. You don't want too much of the orange because it's quite sweet. So I used slightly less than half of the juice from the orange, but I used all of the juice from the lime and all of the juice from the lemon. And I popped that into a bottle, sealed it up nicely, and left that in the fridge until I was ready to use it later. So remember, we're just using half of the juice. Well, it's just less than half of the juice from the orange, and then I cheekily scoffed the other half because it just looked so good. Now, the cream vegan cheese that I'm using today is Violife or Violife Creamy. This is available in many places around UK, Europe and across the world, I believe. The reason I choose this one is really twofold. It's the flavour and how it sits once it has a liquid mixed into it. Supermarkets are beginning more and more to do their own variety, and there are many other varieties out there. This particular one has the perfect flavour for cheesecakes. It really does work beautifully. So if you can get it, brilliant. If you can't, it doesn't matter. I know that Sainsbury's, Waitrose, Tesco's and the like, they're all doing their own dairy-free or free-from spreads, so you can use any of those. But we're looking for around about 400 grams of this. And what we need to do is squish it with a fork ideally, and you're looking to break down that texture so that it becomes very, very soft and very, very even. Now this did take a couple of minutes, and I popped it into a very large box so it was easy for me to show you on a flat board exactly how to achieve the texture that I'm looking for. So I just kept on going. Initially, obviously you get it out of the pack, you pop it in the box, and then you just squash and squash and squash with the fork until you can begin a more circular motion that you'd be familiar with, almost a beating motion if you prefer, just to break that down so that it is very, very soft and there are no chunks and lumps left in it. Vegan cream cheeses tend to be very, very evenly textured throughout anyway, but we just want to get that nice and soft. So the next section is to add the citrus juice to our cream cheese mix. And in order to do this in such a way that you don't overwhelm and curdle your cream cheese, is I separated it into 4 doses, if you like. I just added a little bit at a time, got it to mix in nicely, and you will find that the cream cheese becomes softer as you go, and then just added another section until it was all in there. Now if you manage to get some of the pith through the juicer into your juice, it's unimportant. It's actually quite lovely to have a little bit more of the whole fruit in there, so don't worry if there's a little bit of a more solid material in there. It's absolutely fine as long as you've not got any pips, because nobody wants to eat a pip really. Well, I mean, I don't know, maybe you do. I certainly don't want that in my cheesecake. So we would just continue mixing until that's a really lovely, soft, and the smell coming away from it now is very, very fresh and zesty, very, very fruity. And what we're going to do now is begin to add in our icing sugar. So the icing sugar, again, I added little bit by little bit. I didn't actually measure this, but it was up to around about 100 grams of icing sugar. Now, if you want a stiffer cheesecake and you want to serve it more quickly, you can indeed use a significantly larger quantity of icing or powdered sugar. I kept it quite low because I like the flavour of the citrus to come through. I'm also keen to keep the carbs. It's not low in this recipe, it's not a low carb recipe by any chalk. However, I'm conscious of not using too much when I don't need to. So for me, probably between 75 and 100 grams of icing or powdered sugar in this recipe is plenty. And we're going to add that little by little, exactly as we did with the juice, quarter by quarter really, until you're achieving a slightly softer than you desire texture, because as you leave it in the fridge, especially if you have the opportunity to leave it overnight, it will begin to settle and it doesn't harden up, but it will become a little bit more firm to the touch and obviously to the bite, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for something that's pleasant in appearance and pleasant on the palate, and it has a great mouthfeel. So by all means, you can adapt the recipe sort of up to 100 grams if you're looking for a nice tart flavour with enough residual sweetness underneath. But if you want it to be stiffer or you need it to be used much sooner, do add some more sugar as you go. Just make sure that it is completely blended. Next up, we're going to be adding that lovely chopped zest that we gained from our fruits earlier, and then we finally chopped on the board. Now, I kept mine in a sealed pot just to stop it from oxidizing, and what we're going to do is stir that all in now to the cream cheese blend. And the smell, again, is beautiful. The natural oils that are present in citrus peel are absolutely magnificent. I did forget to mention earlier, but of course you should be washing your fruit before you use it. Make sure that it's completely dry before you begin to remove the zest. So just make sure that that is all lovely and stirred in nicely, evenly distributed throughout. And then obviously at this juncture, if you really want to, you can have a little bit of a taste test to make sure that it's to your flavour. Seal your container and pop it in the fridge. Now, usually with cheesecakes, they tend to harden quite quickly. With this particular recipe, because we've added so much juice, it doesn't harden quickly at all. So we're going to pop that in the fridge and allow it to kind of the flavours to come together, and also allow it to become a little bit firmer to the touch. So to create our cheesecake base, we are using a very traditional 1970s emergency dinner party staple, which was back then a pack of digestives and some butter. Of course, this is now the 2020s, the roaring 20s, so I'm looking to veganise the recipe. As I mentioned earlier, many own brand oaty biscuits, and it's spelt in a variety of different ways, are in fact accidentally vegan. You will need to check the recipe panels on each, there are no guarantees. Now, I used my NutriBullet to crush these down, and I put about a third of a packet in at a time, and you just tap the base and just gently tap the side of the canister to get the whole biscuit parts to fall onto the blades, and then I just popped that into a bowl, did the next third, popped that into a bowl, did the next third, and then just tapped that out so that everything was in the bowl. If you don't have access to a high speed or high powered blender, you can do it the old fashioned way, the way my mother did it, which was either in a very heavy polythene bag or a muslin, and she'd whack it with a rolling pin. Now, there's something to be said for the stress relief you get from cracking biscuits with a rolling pin. It's a lot of fun, but if you have a high-speed blender, why wouldn't you use it, you know? The next thing that we are going to do is gently melt our oil. Now, the oil that you use, it must be solid at refrigerated temperature, preferably still solid at room temperature. There are a number of brands that you can use that are available around the world in different locations with different materials making them up. Now, you will need to decide which is the best for you. I know the Danish brand Naturli, they do a hard butter, which is absolutely perfect for this, but you can use such things as Stork Baking, which is certified as vegan, and Trex, which is also vegan in the UK. But obviously you'll need to look at the ingredients panels and decide if they're right for you and what you're trying to achieve. The reason I say melt the oil gently is my hob goes from 1 to 6, and I just pop it on 1 and very, very gently allow the oil, and I put it directly into a saucepan, into a milk pan in fact, and just let that soften. And just before the last bit, the last iceberg has disappeared, you can turn the heat off and just let the residual heat do that for you. Give it a bit of a stir and it will melt itself completely. You don't want it to be spitting everywhere, you don't want it to be boiling hot, you just need it to be liquid. So in your large bowl, we're going to add the melted oil little by little. Now, the reason I'm saying little by little is that dependent on how many biscuits you ate during the biscuit crushing process, or how much air there was in between the biscuit particles when they were created, you don't know exactly how much oil you're going to need. Now, I would say a good 3-to-1 ratio is ideal, so 300 grams of biscuits to 100 grams of oil usually works. It's a fail-safe. I don't think you will need more than that. You may need slightly less. So add little by little and stir and stir and stir, and make sure that every piece of biscuit particulate has come into contact with some of your melted oil. And it's when it starts to just bind together is when we're interested in using it. If it's too sloppy, then you will end up with a very hard, very brittle base which tastes oily. We want to taste the biscuits and not so much the oil. It's I mean, Naturli is obviously going to taste really, really nice in this recipe, but what we're looking for here is the flavour of the biscuit. In other recipes to come, and I will be making different cheesecake recipes as the weeks go by, if you respond well to this and if you're interested in vegan cooking, vegan baking and so on and so forth, then I will bring more to you. But there are other alternatives for base making which I will mention as we go. Once you're happy with the texture of your biscuit crumb and oil mix, once it's all starting to bind together, you may have some oil left over, you may not. We're going to start pressing it into a pan. I'm just going to flip onto the next page. Here I have used a 7-inch biscuit pan or sandwich pan, and I had enough for 6 very, very tiny, almost like amuse-bouche size portions of cheesecake. Now you could do exactly the same, so a 7-inch sandwich pan plus 6 miniature portions. I like to think of them as tasting portions. Or you could go for an 8-inch pan and a slightly deeper base. Bearing in mind that my calories that I stated at the beginning of the video are based on 12 portions. So if you're going to go for the slightly larger pan, then you'll still need to cut it into 12 to get that kind of calorific content. So pile in your biscuit mix to whatever receptacle you're going to use. If it's all in one, then slap it all in one and then press it down so that it's very, very even. Use the back of a rounded spoon to get that nice and smooth. Make sure that you're pushing to the edges of the pan to ensure that you get a full cheesecake. You don't want crumbly edges. When you cut this, you want it to come out like a slice of cake ideally. So make sure that you push that biscuit mix to the edge of the pan and then get it lovely and smooth with the back of a spoon. My ideal would be to allow that then to sit in a fridge for at least 2 hours. This gives you the opportunity to know that there's nothing that's gone wrong, you haven't miscalculated, you haven't accidentally used the wrong fat and it's never ever going to set. We can at some point in the future look at slightly more raw variations of this, so an extra virgin cold pressed coconut oil. It's never going to set because it is generally quite soft at room temperature, so that makes a crumb base which makes for an open eating or an upside down cheesecake. But for today we want it to actually set nice and firmly so that you could, if you wanted to, hold it thus. You don't have to. You could be really polite and eat it with a cake fork. So once your base has set firmly, we're going to draw the topping mixture back out of the fridge. Now this will have all come together. It should smell delightful. Do feel free to take a taste test at this juncture. It's lovely. It's zesty but slightly sweet. You don't really get an overpowering hit of cheese as you do in some cheesecakes, certainly not like a baked cheesecake, so I hope that you're going to enjoy it anyway. So what we're going to do is spoon the mix over the top of our base, and we're going to get that relatively smooth. I mean, you could spend hours if you wanted, virtually with a set square and a spirit level, making it absolutely perfect, but I kind of like it being all swirly and interesting and home crafted. Once you have got the desired level of mixture on your mini amuse-bouche cheesecakes or into the large pan, it's entirely up to you, then I quite like to dust it with the glitter powder. You don't have to use that at all. You could use icing sugar or powdered sugar, but my recommendation would be to use that through a sieve so that you don't end up with any lumps on the surface, because it's just not very pretty. So a sieve with icing sugar, push through with a spoon, gives you a nice snow-like appeal. For the example that I made today, I topped with a couple of different things. One was the powder sugar coated zest that we reserved in the very first step. So just toss that over the top and allow that to kind of separate out so that everybody gets a little taste. It's lovely because I've not used a huge amount of sugar on the zest. It was just enough to stop it oxidizing. And it's really pretty with the glitter on. Even if you use plain icing sugar, it again is really pretty. And just separate that out so that it sits evenly over the surface of the cake and everybody gets a bit of each colour. You can be really meticulous or you can just slap it on, it's entirely up to you. If you wanted to dust it just with the glitter icing sugar, that's also a nice effect. Or you can do, as I have here, some freeze-dried berries. Now these ones all wanted to clump together at once, which was quite hilarious when you're making a film, but never mind. You could, if you wanted to, use fresh fruits, or you could use jelly sweets. Obviously check that they are vegan. Very many jelly fruits these days are vegan, but do check for lactic acid. Sometimes it is not vegan. And unless the manufacturer has specified vegan, then I would take steps to check it further before you use it if you're serving to vegans. Anyway, this cheesecake will keep for about 6 days in the fridge. It does improve with age. From about day 2, it really firms up. It's really lovely. Or if you have an industrial fridge where your temperature is closer to 2 to 3 degrees rather than 5 degrees, it will firm up again a little bit quicker. It's delightful, it's light, it's tantalising. If you want to ask me any questions about the recipe, just drop me a comment below here on YouTube. And if there are any specific recipes that you'd like me to try and veganise in the future, let me know. If you'd rather I just got my pliers back out and went back to making jewellery, also let me know. I'm here to entertain you. I'm here to try and be informative, and I'm also here to try and demonstrate that vegan food can be scrumptious. It doesn't always have to be virtuous. We're not always looking to have a celery salad or anything like that. You can have really, really delicious food. I will pop the recipe ingredients in the information for this video below. But any questions, please do drop me a comment and we'll take it from there. Thank you so much for continuing to watch and support. I look forward to catching up with you soon. Bye bye for now.